Bruno, thank you so much for joining me. I would love for you to introduce yourself, who you are, what you do.
Well, first, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be talking to you today. And thanks for letting me introduce myself because I do have a little bit of an unusual background. I am French, so that's why you hear a little bit of the accent. I moved here about 25 years ago, and here is Silicon Valley for me. I've been in the data, AI, and enterprise software world for all that time, 25 plus years. I came here for a startup. I did four startups over the last 25 years, and we sold two. I've also gone through the craziness of IPOs. So I worked at a company that went from a um, multi-billion-dollar company acquisition, and I also worked at Microsoft and Google before I joined IBM. Here, I'm focused on enterprise software, product management, and engineering in particular.
So, you've lived at the heart of data and AI for a while now, and I would love to hear the pivotal moment, uh, not a promotion, not a career change, but just a project or a problem or a piece of code that fundamentally changed how you saw this world.
I'm going to give you a little bit of an unusual answer because I think everyone might tell you something that's professional, and certainly across all these organizations, I've had the opportunity to go through, scaled companies, failures, and incredible successes. But I will say the pivotal moment for me was when I moved to the UK. So I was studying in France in college, and I did not speak English. Well, in fact, my native language is French. My first language in school was German, so I was really challenged with English. And I decided to make this bet on myself, moved to London, went to a great university in London. I mean, just to tell you, I was so bad, I couldn't even understand the difference between the American accent and the British accent. In fact, the first schoolmate I met, she talked to me and I said, "Oh, where are you from in England?" And she said, "Oh, I'm from Connecticut." So that's how bad it was. Um, and then ultimately, I just worked harder than anyone I knew to get there. The university system in the UK is just an incredible one. And it really showed me that, in this field, we're sometimes incapable of seeing what we can do. And in fact, we're capable of doing way more than we think we are. And this has helped me not only personally, but it's also helped me, I think, be a better manager and be a better leader of others. I write this blog that it's called Nobody Cares, where I try to scale my leadership lessons. And it's really around that: is how do we codify a way for ourselves to try and see beyond ourselves and how we can move beyond. I've even written a user manual for myself. So people that work for me, they realize that I work for them and they should use me as a product. It's called How to Bruno. And I named it that because one of my employees told me to name it like that. And so I think the middle lesson here is we're often afraid, and particularly in gigantic shifts like the agentic shift we're going to talk about today, we tend to be afraid. We tend to worry maybe too much that we won't be able to, in fact, take advantage of the evolution. And that's completely not true. That's not what I found. Obviously, now I work in the US in a company where I speak English every day. So, if you told me that 30 years ago, that probably would have been very scary. And so I would think about it that way. Any entrepreneur, any leader today that's working through scary projects that are transformational, it's actually the right thing. I had a CTO in one of my startups who used to say, if it feels like we're going too fast, we're going at the right speed. And so that's what I would leave people with.
Sidetrack here. Uh,
Yeah.
why German as the second
Ah,
language?
I told you this was going to be an unusual interview. A few reasons. The first one is that in the French system, they try to get you to do hard things early. And so we like math, we like history, and we like tough languages. And so English was identified as a language that was easy for most French people. It wasn't easy for me, but it was easy for most people. So my mom put me in German just to challenge. And it's been very helpful. I also did 8 years of Latin, if you believe that. I don't really take a lot of advantage, although I can probably guess the meaning of any word that I'll read. I don't
Mhm.
speak Greek, but I guess if you know Latin and Greek, you could probably figure it out. So that's the reason. The other reason is really a historical one. I'm a French Jew, so my grandfather was a prisoner of war, and I felt like learning German could be a great way to try and make peace. In fact, my grandfather helped me with my German homework, and when I asked him how he learned that, he told me he learned that in prison. So that probably
Mm.
wasn't the best way to emotionally connect with your grandfather, but in a way it was healing. When I went to study in Germany, I studied with people who, as grandparents, probably fought mine in the war, and so I thought that was also an important part of the culture. You gotta heal at some point.
That's a great story. I'm glad I asked the question. Always nice to have little sidetracks like that. Um, so let's go from uh, childhood in France over to Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
You've seen this world from inside giants like Google and Oracle, but also from the startup trenches. And we know that startups, I know from personal experience of working in a startup, that it's all about survival and belief against the odds and
Yeah.
doing hard things. Um, is there a story from your startup days, a moment where, it's a David and Goliath battle that taught you a lesson about AI or evangelizing new technology that you still use today?
I love that you're asking that question because you're right. It's often David and Goliath, and I would say even if you work in a large organization and you're working on a new project, something transformational, like I experienced at Microsoft. I worked at Microsoft for 7 years, but every year we launched a product that really was not traditional. There's lots of examples. I'll just give you one because I think there's a lesson there that I learned that I think was really powerful and helped me. I was working at this company. We launched from scratch. There's six of us, and so five developers and me. And we really had nothing. I mean, what I mean nothing is we didn't have a website, we didn't have a marketing database, we just had code and idea. A great idea, by the way. And It was very much a David and Goliath. In fact, last week I was at an event with Malcolm Gladwell, and I reminded him that 15 years ago, Malcolm and I worked together at MIT. In fact, I have the video, so I pulled up the video. And when I did the startup I'm about to talk about, I sent him a message and I said, I just bought your book about David and Goliath. Would you sign it for me? So he signed it. He signed it, and I gave it to my colleagues at the time. Of course, we became a large company, we scaled, and so forth. But I think the DNA of David and Goliath is very true. So what's the story behind David and Goliath is when you're fighting against a large organization or a large system or a large set of beliefs, we have this idea that they got there for a reason and they can stay there for a reason, but you forget the blind spots that Goliath has, right? And in the specific example, because I didn't have a single customer in my database, I looked at the industry and I looked at identity differentiation. Why did we want to start this company? A lot of it was about neutrality, is that we had access to information that was cutting across most vendors inside that ecosystem. The company we started was in the Hadoop space, and we were doing acceleration for Hadoop, and we had this really cool technology. And so I started this industry survey where I would essentially come out with insights on what is the maturity level of this market when it comes to Hadoop and the specific problem I'm solving. So it was a difficult move to make because it felt like the industry really did not have the answer. And who was I, a small company, to want to do that survey? But what I did is I partnered with the large three companies in the space who had access to that market. I created by myself a SurveyMonkey survey. In fact, I broke SurveyMonkey. It became so successful, I got to meet the CEO of SurveyMonkey, and we made that product better in the process. Um, but what happened is I came up with 20 questions that I felt everybody should have the answers to. And then I went to the CMOs of these three companies and I said, you can collect that information by yourself because if you send that to your people, they will know this is biased because you're one of the three vendors. But if I do that for you, one, you will get the answer. Naturally, you'll get the answers only from the people that are in your database. So, there's got to be if you will, a wall between the three vendors. But we all collectively get the answer of where the maturity of this market is. So it taught me a few things is that it really doesn't matter how small you are. What matters is where are the breaking points in the market? How can you serve your customers the most? Because while it's a value to my partners, it's also incredible value for the people in this market. Everybody's wondering, am I behind? Am I ahead? And so having this survey created an incredible service to the community. And then naturally what it did, it allowed me to build my own database of thousands of names with really granular information of what was going on. So again, you know, why is this a David and Goliath? Because the Goliath had a gigantic blind spot. If they were to ask that question, people would know that it was going to be biased. And I'm the small one, the neutral one that can ask the question on behalf of, and in fact get to the resolution we want. We want to know where the maturity is. These customers want to do that, and the additional benefit it has for me is now I become the, if you will, the touch point for what's in fact going on in this market.
It's also a story about com- collaboration with competitors too, in a
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
about finding a common a common place where it's a win for the industry as well. Yeah.
It's very true. I think most entrepreneurs, they start with who do I compete with, and sometimes they get a little too obsessed about that. And for me, competition is a data point. The data point I care about the most is what's the customer problem? What's the job to be done? How do I become the company that is most helpful to them? Now, you have to be humble and realize you're not the solution for everything. I mean, I think if you've worked in enterprise software, you probably know the average company is buying hundreds of applications. They have multiple databases. They're doing many things at the same time. And so my job is to make sure that I can cooperate with the ecosystem and provide the best value to the customer. So in a way, I'm really not competing against anybody else. I'm just kind of competing against myself in a way, and who I was prior to the version of the product I have. Where competition is helpful, I think, is when you come out with value statements for your company. Um, the way you get people to change or take a look at an approach is to provide a 10x value. So that's where competition is useful because you benchmark yourself
Mm-hmm.
against similar solution to the job. But it starts with understanding the job to be done.
You've built a powerful philosophy around systems of action
Yeah.
over systems of intelligence. I would like to hear what that means and tell us the story of how you came to that philosophy.
Of course, yeah. So I've been in the space for a long time. So I've lived through the system of records, system of engagement, and system of intelligence kind of evolution. I spend a lot of time with customers, so I can't claim that I invented this. This is really the result of listening to customers. Just to give you an idea, I've been this company about a year, and I've probably, spoken with about 200 customers. So that's probably what, 4 a week, if you believe there's 50 weeks of work during the year. Um, and all great organizations, by the way, right? You think about USA and Heineken and PepsiCo and NatWest. So these are organizations, they have a serious business they're running. They're running lots of workloads in production. So there's a lot to learn here. And there's two sound bites that kind of come to the top as I'm looking for patterns. The first one is this customer that had been building systems of intelligence for lots of people. And so this gentleman comes to me and he says, "Well, I have 20,000 dashboards that we built over the last year." And I said, "Oh, how many of them are used by how many people?" He said, "Out of the 20,000 dashboards I have, 18,000 of them are used by less than 8 users."
Hmm.
And the only thing that came through my mind here, I don't know that it's a quote by Einstein, but it certainly probably had something to say about that. He said, "Don't let information just become knowledge." And I think that's very true, right? In a lot of organizations, we're really happy with the dashboards, the scorecards, we do reports and all of that. But if all that is knowledge, you're not really advancing. The reason for why you had this dashboard in the first place is to understand what you should do, not what you should know. Of course, you have to know to do, but you can't stop there. So don't let information become knowledge. That was the first kind of lesson I learned from this customer. And the second one was a customer I just met recently. And I was asking them about how do you accelerate the path to resolution and action? And we came to, well, how many employees you have? And he smiled at me and he says, I have 200. Oh, I said, what roles? He said, well, I have 50 humans and I have 150 agents. And so
Hmm.
I thought that the way that we then go to action changes, right? Because in the old method, we would have a system of record, a system of engagement, system of knowledge and intelligence, and it was stopped there. And we forgot the most important thing, which is the action. Now the question is who takes the action. And so that's how I came up with this idea of I think the next barrier is systems of actions because the differentiation, the way you will get to outcomes and impact is the speed at which you can turn data information into action. And everyone's talking about intelligence, and I definitely don't want the space to be stuck in the intelligence uh, realm and turn that intelligence just into knowledge. That would be an incredible waste of the lessons we've learned over the last 30 years in going through the internet, the cloud, and now agentic AI.
Where are people stuck in that leap from intelligence to action right now, right? In terms of adoption, in terms of innovation. Talk me through where you're seeing the bottlenecks or just the sticking points.
We're stuck in multiple areas. This is my observation. The first one is mindset. What I mean by that is most vendors out there will tell you it's a revolution. You got to erase everything you got and completely reinvent. And I actually think the truth is not that at all. My observation with customers is that it's an evolution. Bill Gates had this when I worked at Microsoft. Bill Gates had this thing he printed. He said we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years, but we underestimate the change that will in fact occur in the next 10. And so there's a perspective here that I think leaders listening to us need to build is don't rush into breaking everything. One of the reasons for why you are such a great business today and why you have the opportunity of selecting alternatives or accelerants into what you're going to get to is probably because you're doing a lot of great things already. So the reality is how do you adopt new technology and marry them to what you already got done? It's kind of like, when you get married, it's something old and something new. So the bit here is that there's definitely something new and we should be excited about that. And there is something old, which is issues around, well, a simple one is governance or security or cost management. So I think if you start with that mindset, I think you'll evolve much faster. And then right now, you have a lot of people doing experimentation. I think that phase is coming to an end. And what we're learning, because we work with a lot of organizations that are in production at scale, is that the questions they ask in production are vastly different from the questions they ask in experimentation. They're around guardrails, they are around controlling cost, they're around attributing outcomes to input. And so orchestrating for that, I think, is a challenge for organizations. So mindset, orchestrating, and then the final one I will give you is that you have to make the right strategic choice. You are going to live in a heterogeneous environment forever. I think last generation looked at saying, oh, we could put all the data in one enterprise data warehouse and everything would be great. Or we could put all the data in one cloud and everything will be great. Or we can rely on one application, everything will be great. I think what we learned is that it's not true at all. I think over 70% of enterprises and organizations have more than two clouds. The average organization has 1,000 applications they have to work with. And so knowing that you are orchestrating and architecting for hybrid, I think is really important for people who want to succeed.
We've got a little bit of a stat here for you. Uh, Gartner predicts 40% of agentic AI projects will fail. And that means, and there's also, there's so many headlines about the failure of AI to produce a ROI or getting, not adopted enough. And so you are working with a headwind of skepticism around AI. And I would love to hear a about a conversation that you've had with a really skeptical leader, someone who says, this is all hype. It's not worth the cost, the risk, the change. And how did you overcome that skepticism?
Two things. First, 40%, I actually think it's pretty low. I would have
Yeah.
expected it to be higher, because most things that are worth doing are not easy, right? So if it was 100% a success, I would be worried. Second is, what is the timeline on which you're measuring this failure and success rate? If you look at the history of the internet, it took us, I think, 10 years to adopt the internet, truly adopt it, right? Where every company or the majority of companies had um, a website. If you look at the history of cloud, it's probably the same. It's probably 10 years. So right, it goes back to the comment I made earlier, this idea that we sometimes, completely underestimate the transformative power of a technology over 10 years. We overestimate it over a short period of time. So I would say it's not really helpful to just look at an industry percentage and decide if it's good for you or not. Most organizations I talk to, they are stuck between two acronyms. The first one is FOMO, that everyone's familiar with, right? It's fear of missing out. And so you got to resist that. You got to make sure that you have principles and not falling for the FOMO, because nobody's trying to be cool, right? We're trying to be efficient, useful, and then if we can be cool, that's a benefit. And then the second one is FOMU, right? FOMU is FOMU is the fear of messing up. And so as a leader, if I'm talking to you as a leader, and many of the CIOs and technology leaders I talk to, is the truth is somewhere these two, right? And you got to go out and then identify what use case is going to be most valuable for you, because in a lot of these conversations, it's really about the technology itself. It's more about the emotional attachment to what's going to make your career and what is not. Um, um, Clayton Christensen has a great book called Competing Against Luck, and he talks about this theory of jobs to be done. If your listeners haven't gotten this book, this is a great book to get, because it talks about um, how people make decisions and how to build the best solutions for the need, and it starts by understanding the customer's job to be done. Clayton Christensen, probably people don't know him, wrote The Innovator's Dilemma, so he's best known for that book. But the book I'm mentioning is Competing Against Luck, and it's really about that. So my conversations with leaders are, let's define the job. Let's define what is it that's going to drive value for you in your organization. What are the current hurdles, and what are the attachments to it? The 40%, the 80%, all of that is great, but it's forgetting this notion of time, and it's probably higher in some places if you make the wrong choice. It's probably way lower if you make the right choices. And what's going to help you here is your principles. A great example is model strategy today, right? 18 months ago, everyone's talking about large language models. And now we're starting to see organizations first having a hard time deciding which large language model to go for, and people realizing, wait, small language models could be helpful. The principle that would have helped you at the beginning is, how do I build with agility? If I don't know what the best model is tomorrow, what size, which provider, how do I work in a way where I can mix and match, change quickly, and adapt? The ones that just did not have that principle might have gone down a silo, and now they're figuring out how to get out of it. It's really hard. So that's where, I've seen the ones that win think about it that way, is they have a set of principles. They recognize that there's a lot of challenges, but tell me something I don't already know. I mean, cloud and internet have gone through that. We failed miserably in the first few months, and then over time things rationalize. Because I think the alternative is to ignore this moment, and that, I think that's a mistake. Not participating is a mistake.
It's actually, you were talking about how, it took so long for every company to have a website. And I actually sold advertising for the yellow pages back when smartphones first came out, and
Yeah,
trying to convince these businesses, look, you know, I'm supposed to be selling you yellow pages ads, but maybe you should be investing in internet
yeah,
advertising.
yeah,
Maybe you should
and
be investing in a website, right? And getting
yeah,
them to think about, look, this is inevitable.
yeah.
This isn't something you can just stand on the sidelines for.
I still have my HTML book, how to, and then, with coding assistants today, probably don't need to learn HTML, right? So it's about participating here. and participate in a way that works for you. Um, what I know doesn't work is the revolution, right? Destroying what you have, unless you just started the company and there's nothing to destroy. But most organizations we talk to, there are already lots of great things they're doing. So we got to be able to harness that and then get into the future at the speed and the matter that matters for them the most. It just goes back to the job, right? What is the job to be done?
I'm going to go on another sidetrack with you here.
All right,
Um,
I'm ready for it.
Apparently, you have an interest in stand up comedy. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, it's almost the only TV I watch, to be honest. I'm
Yeah.
probably the only person you're talking to that's never seen Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, all these series that people talk about. I just haven't
So
had the
who are your heroes?
Jim Gaffigan, all these comedians who are clean in a way. One, because I think you don't have to be vulgar to be funny, and then two, I it's something I do with my kids. Right, I have now my kids are much older, but as they were growing up, I thought it was also a great way to develop character and perspective. Is what I like about stand-up comedian is they will look at a world that we kind of accept. It's a very similar mindset as the entrepreneur, and they find something that we just forgot to see, and now they point to it and they're like, "Isn't that interesting?" And I love that because, well, I'm fairly, you know, how would I say this? Because I'm not from here, I have a lot of those moments. Um, I talk to my wife about English expressions all the time, right? Well, why do you say it that way? But it's you all accept it because you grew up with it. The idea of like I'm gonna jump in the shower makes me laugh all the time. You don't have to jump, just get in the shower. Who's rushing you? But there's hundreds of expressions like that. And so I think stand-up comedians just kind of remind us of that. As I can't remember the exact quote, but I think it might have been Steve Jobs who said, the something about the unreasonable man, and the world only evolves because the unreasonable person, in the way, it's a little bit of, I don't like the concept of being unreasonable where you're making other people's life a nightmare. You should never do that. um the idea I like is the different look on reality that most people have accepted.
Yeah. It's also kind of the beginner's mindset too, of coming to
Yeah.
something with new eyes and saying, "Well, I know that this is the way it's always been, but why?"
why
Or,
why does it exist this way, right? There's a good reason, and I'm
mm-hmm,
not saying you should ignore it, but Voltaire had this thing. He used to say, it's the quality of our questions, not the quality of our answers. And I believe that, of being a dad, and spending a lot of time trying to figure out how I'm most helpful to my kids. I remind them of that, is that you really need to learn how to ask the right questions. And it's difficult. And that's why not everybody does it. So,
it's scary. It can be
yeah,
scary to ask, to question what has
yeah,
always been, and to
yeah,
actually, it also puts people in a vulnerable position to question themselves or question their organizations, for example, to bring it back to AI. Something that we talk about a lot at Writer is
yeah,
this notion of examining these processes and workflows and
yeah,
re-examining them.
yeah.
We know that this process isn't ideal, but it's how we've done it. Is it really going to work if we just pop an agent into this particular workflow, right? And kind of
100%.
re-examining these things.
In
So
fact,
to
that should
take the
be,
conversation back to AI, are what are the holes that you have to poke in this kind of systemic culture? Uh,
well, what you just said here, I think, is a rule, right? Every new technology looks like an excuse to try something new. The first question you should ask is, what are we trying to accomplish? So the rule should be, if process useful, automate. If process not useful, eliminate. And we forget that rule. It's a pretty straightforward rule. Um, that's how we should approach the agentic, opportunity. Is there's probably places where it's very helpful. There's places where it's not helpful at all, and we should question the process. Why are we doing it in the first place? And then there's always this thing I call the tyranny of the or. Our brain is very comfortable looking for it's this or that, and the reality is this and that. a great example in the agentic world is the mix between automated workflows that are deterministic with workflows that are probabilistic. Um, and what I found is companies that are in production, in success, and have great success, have figured that out. They figured out the mix. I was just talking to an organization that's deployed the first Gen AI agent in production, 11 million queries. They're getting incredible satisfaction, saying 150% year over year satisfaction of customers. And when you dig into the details, sort of how did you get there? It was 70% deterministic, 30% probabilistic. They created um, journeys, and they had product owners on each of those journeys to identify where do you bring in agentic and where do you not, and what is the dial, if you will. And so that's, I think, great learning, because most people think I got to go and rebuild everything from scratch, and it's very tempting. But we know that's not the answer.
It's also it's a mindset shift as far as automation is concerned too, because I think some people are thinking, oh, it's like RPA, right? It is
Yeah,
just pop, map out, do the blueprint. It will follow this
yeah,
pattern every time, and that's not the case.
yeah,
And the expectation has to be set. This is where the deterministic does come in,
yeah,
but this is where the probabilistic magic happens. This is like the point of the AI, the agentic AI,
yeah.
right?
There's also two
How are you
things that
setting expectations?
with customers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so what I'm trying to do is, because of these hundreds of conversations we had, and it's not just me as a data point. Is luckily I work for an organization that has large businesses, lots of data points. We try to collect enough best practices so we help the rest of the industry. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think the stat is in the industry, 16% of organizations are in production at scale. So that means there's 84% of organizations that they're still struggling. Luckily, I've been exposed to many of those who are succeeding, and we try to come out with guidance on here's what we see. So one of them, we talked about it, right? This idea of mix and match, and so it's kind of what I call agent minus. It's the agent, but there's also a whole set of technologies before the agent, like rules, tools, workflows that need to marry with it. And then there is the what I call agent plus. Agent plus is that while everyone today is obsessed about how easy it should be to build agents, and we are going to get there. It's actually not that easy, right? If you're listening to us and you're trying to build agents and run them into production, I know you could probably build the first agent, but the minute it runs, now you're starting to get into the meat of the issue. But agent plus is this idea that if you live in the world that has hundreds of agents that might be built by multiple vendors, some hyperscalers, some that are not, maybe an application vendor, maybe your developers or hand coding agents, then the difficulty is going to be on top of that, which is going to be orchestration of these agents. How are they supposed to talk to each other? If we go back to the concept of system of actions, the reality is that in order to enable the system of action, you're probably going to need three big areas of capabilities. The first one is autonomy. So, do these agents have the right permission to operate with high autonomy? What are the feedback loops? What are the risk profiles? What are the policies that need to be applied so they are truly autonomous? I mean, I know we use the term autonomy as a blanket word, but there's actually a lot of details that The second bit is agency. Let's say that they have autonomy and their compliance. Is it purpose aligned to an objective?
Mm-hmm.
And do they have the agency to complete the task with optimizing for efficiency, optimizing for safety, satisfaction, revenue outcome, and all that? And then the third bit is accountability. Okay, there's an action that's been taken. Is this action auditable? Um, was it done with transparency? Was biased, checked? And so when you think about Agent Plus, don't worry about creating agents. I mean, you should worry about creating agents. But what I mean by that is don't be over obsessed about the agent creation, because the next thing here is the orchestration of those agents,
Mhm.
the operations of those agents. And to run a system of action effectively, you're going to have to come up with some principles, rules. Of course, there's technology that's required, but the idea is if winning means designing a system of action, there's some rules,
Mhm.
and you should be writing them right now.
But we have a white paper coming out called the Agentic Compact that really does
Well, there you go.
frame it creates a framework of questions you should be exploring, not only as you build agents but as you're considering, a platform for agents, and applying, where in the human workflows they belong and things like that. So uh,
Yeah.
cool to know we are meeting the moment. uh, but that also brings us to framing, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about, there are going to be some, you're talking about, you work with serious businesses. They're
Mhm.
making high stakes decisions, and there's going to be a point where an AI agent is going to recommend some kind of action that will cause a lot of perhaps a chain reaction of outcomes.
Mhm.
And what is the single most important question that a human leader needs to ask in that moment when you've got an AI agent bringing this insight and this recommendation to you, um, that
Mhm.
that represents why we have these human orchestrators.
Yeah. So this goes back. Remember the comment I made earlier when I met this customer and I said, "How many employees do you have?" And they said, "I have 250 agents and 50 humans." And I think the rules of leadership also apply to agents. So what are the rules of leadership? Of course, there's a lot of books about that. I'm probably not the world authority on that, but I'll just tell you what I learned is the best leaders do three things. One, they identify the superpowers of their employees. They really know, okay, when I need to solve this problem, the best person on the team, hopefully the best person in the world, is this person, this team. Second is they create an environment in which that superpower could be applied with maximum impact. And that's where I think a lot of leaders fail is that they have the great players, but they have not figured out a way to just optimize. Either they can't collaborate, either the company doesn't enable you to create an environment, or maybe you're unable to communicate the coaching feedback that individual or that team needs. So this is a lot of failure there in the environment. And then the third idea is the inspiration is it's one thing for me to see what could get someone to the next level, sometimes things they can't see themselves. Kind of going back to my example of my trip to London, right? My experience in the UK is I couldn't see what I couldn't do until I experienced it. Is inspire people to, rise to the opportunity. So in the case of an agentic situation, well, what you really have is you really have to identify where is this agentic system going to be the best in the world? What is the superpower of this agent? Sometimes it might not be make the decision all the way. Sometimes it might be checking on the decisions of other agents or checking on the decisions of other humans and so I think that's probably the first principle you need to drive for is can this agent in fact drive the process all the way? If not, what are the places where it's the best at, and what environment can I create in order for that agent to have full autonomy and full accountability? um, and ultimately you have to decide, right? Because if the accountability is to the human needs to make the decision. um, that's probably the most important principle. So I guess where I'm driving at is that you know the science of leadership does not change, right? It's still the superpower, the environment, and then the inspiration. The art of it might, evolve a bit.
So you're looking at this period of your career, which has by no means ended, right?
I hope not.
We're in the midst of it. Thank goodness. Uh, what? But you're introducing the world to agentic AI. I mean, that's what you're doing. Uh, what do you hope your story will be if you look back at it? What's that personal contribution to the story of agentic AI?
It's a big question. I think the first thing I'll tell you is tell you what I hope it's not going to be about. I hope it's not going to be about buzzwords and you know I'm more interested in the impact. I've written two books on the topic, so I'm interested in surfacing what I've learned from customers, and probably, the most important thing for me is really the people that I get to work with, both the employees and my customers. I'll give you an example. The last 5 jobs I've had, I don't think I've applied for them. It's been people I've worked with, people I've worked for. Um, Today, the way I hire or bring in new talent, it's really off of a recruiter's list of people I don't know. Um, that's the legacy I'm interested in, is that when people think about this field, I've either worked with them or helped them in their job somehow. I write this blog, like I was saying, Nobody Cares blog, and the whole idea is to scale my learnings and my leadership. So I really hope that that's kind of the impact for people, um, because ultimately that's really the only thing that matters, right? This is not the last technology transformation we are going to go through together, and so I hope that some of the principles I've learned kind of will help um, people develop, their own mastery. There was it Den Pink that said, people care about 3 things. They care about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so I care about that. I care about, did the work that I do help people achieve mastery, gain autonomy, and refine their purpose.
Before I end this episode, I need to know, how many books do you read
Ah!
per year?
I read a lot of books. And in fact, I cheat a little bit, I'll tell you, because I'm a slow reader. It's actually one of the issues that I had early on. It take me forever. And then I understood that, in fact, it's not about how fast I read it, it's how well I understand it.
Hmm.
And so I put less pressure on myself to read lots of books. I put pressure on myself to understand them well. So the way I do it is I I have an app that has summaries of books, so I get exposed to a lot of ideas. So I listen to a lot of those. In fact, I probably listen to 2 or 3 book summaries a day. I do it at the gym. I know most people listen to music, but I listen to books on tape, so maybe that's another problem. Then once I've decided I want to read the book, I get the book on digital. Then I get it in audio, and sometimes I also get it in paper because I like the feel of the book. And so by the time I've read a book, like you could see now, right? By the time I've read a book, I probably read it 4 or 5 times. And so then it really has a huge influence on me because I remember these quotes, or I remember these principles. And that's the mission. And I'll probably reread all these books that I talked about to you at some level, either listen to the audio on digital or on paper. Um, yeah, reading is really important. I love writing, and so I think to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader.
Well, I love how you've brought these bits of wisdom to this conversation through your adventures in reading, through your adventures in tech. And I really, really enjoyed talking with you today, Bruno. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and it was great fun to talk to you as well.